Hi there, I'm Jim Zirin. Welcome back for more conversations. Economists tell us we are in the biggest economic downturn since the Great Depression of the 1930s. Yet the stock market is soaring, investment and savings are way up. So what is the answer? President Biden has launched an ambitious $1.9 trillion COVID relief package, which is designed to stimulate the economy. Will he succeed? Here to tell us is Steve Rattner. Steve Rattner was the car czar in the Obama administration and is credited with saving the automobile industry. He is a frequent contributor on MSNBC's Morning Joe, and we are delighted to welcome Steve Rattner to the program. Steve, thanks very much for coming on and shedding some light, we hope, on the Biden relief package, $1.9 trillion. Is it going to do any good?
It's going to certainly do good. There are many other questions around it that I'm sure you'll ask, but there's no question that we need to keep leaning in as on the government side. This problem is not going to be solved either economically or public health without more help from the government. So there are many parts of this package: the money for vaccinations, the money for schools, the money for state and local. We can quibble about details, but there are many parts of this package that are very important to getting this economy back on its feet again.
Well, maybe we should start with the economy. We had kind of a lame job performance in January. Do you expect an uptick in February? And what is the economic outlook?
Well, the economic outlook essentially today is completely tied to the public health situation. But really, the issue is not that people don't have money to spend. It's not that that factories are closing or whatever. It's that people aren't leaving their houses, and correctly so. Obviously, we've asked them to not be as mobile, to not do as many things, certainly not to be going to crowded restaurants and traveling and all that kind of stuff. And so until we solve the public health crisis, it really doesn't matter how much money we spend or how we spend it. It's not going to solve the economic problem. It'll put money in people's pockets, but it's not going to create jobs. So the public health crisis is really the crisis that is driving the economic issues today.
So if we're in crisis, Steve, what accounts for the soaring stock market and the rise in savings and investment?
Well, you have to break those all apart. The rise in savings is really because people have been locked down. They haven't been able to spend, and so they have saved at a very high rate. And in addition to that, what isn't commonly necessarily known is that personal income last year actually went up. It went up by about 5%, even though many people were unemployed, because government transfers, unemployment insurance payments, things like that, count, stimulus checks count as income. And so you had these actual spikes in income that you can see month by month when the government was leaning in. On the other side of the coin, they couldn't spend money for the reason I said. They couldn't go out. And so when you put that together, we have something like $1.6 trillion of so-called dry powder, money that people have in their bank accounts above what they would normally have there, that can and probably much of it will be spent when the lockdown essentially is over. And so I'm getting your stock market question by saying one thing that's underlying the stock market is a belief that the economy is going to come, quote, roaring back in some form or fashion, maybe this summer, again, as the vaccinations get rolled out more fully. The second thing that's underpinning the stock market are low interest rates. Low interest rates are the friend of the stock market. High interest rates are the enemy of the stock market. So sitting here today, you can get a higher dividend. You can get a higher cash return on dividends if you bought the S&P 500 shares than on buying treasuries, plus the potential for future appreciation. So that has pulled enormous amounts of money into the stock market. And the third thing that is driving the stock market today is the fact that, surprisingly perhaps, many companies are reporting surprisingly good earnings and beating expectations. We're right now today in the middle of the earnings season where we're getting earnings for the fourth quarter of last year, and they are coming in very strong. And so the stock market does respond to that.
Well, is the earnings record true across the board? I mean, does that apply to hospitality industries and to airlines and to businesses that are affected dramatically by COVID?
No, of course not. Of course not. Those industries are still struggling. Some of them are struggling a bit less than we thought they'd be struggling. So that's kind of good news in a sense. But if you look at companies, for example, in the tech sector, they are reporting really great earnings. Certainly, the biggest companies like Microsoft and companies like that, but even some of the younger companies, you had Lyft and Uber and DoorDash all reporting in the last few days. Some better than others, but those stocks have all been moving up. The market has been quite happy as a whole with what they're seeing in the earnings numbers.
Now, is the dry powder syndrome true of individuals in the lower income part of the spectrum, or is it really the higher income individuals who are receiving COVID relief?
It is absolutely true that they are the principal beneficiaries of a stock market that was up 18.5% last year. It is absolutely true that they have kept their jobs far more often than people at the bottom end. People who do what you and I do, work as professionals, work at companies that as executives, they have basically remained essentially intact, some substantially better off. This has been probably the most unequally felt recession, downturn, whatever you want to call it, that I can remember in terms of its disparate impacts. If you are a lower income service worker, if you're a woman, if you're a person of color, you have the highest probability of ending up with the short end of the stick in this under these circumstances, because the industries that have been hit hardest, things like hospitality, restaurants, travel, all that stuff, are disproportionately staffed by people in those kinds of jobs. So yes, those people, it's been very tough for those people, which is why some of the things we've done, like the stimulus checks, like the extended special unemployment benefits, have all been designed to help the people who've been affected. And that, to me, is the ideal best policy.
Now we're talking about $1.9 trillion. Is it fiscally irresponsible when already our national debt exceeds GDP?
It's not necessarily irresponsible for that reason. We do need and should always be willing to lean in as a government when there's a need for it. That's what government is for. I'm still a Keynesian economic guy. I believe in Keynesian economics. When an economy is operating below potential, the government should spend more. I think the questions you have to ask is, when is it too much, and what is the right policies to spend it? We have put, I think, around $4 trillion into this economy already through the 4 rescue packages that were passed last year, not to mention what the Federal Reserve is doing. That is 5 times what we put into to the stimulus after 2009. Now, everybody agrees the 2009 stimulus was too small, but does it really need to be 5 times as large? It's already 5 times as large as this time around. Does it need to get larger still? That I think is an important question to ask. And I think you have to also think about the nature of this package of 1.9 trillion. It is essentially focused on, I'll call it consumption. It's effectively focused on putting money out there to give people the ability to consume, to allow state and local governments to avoid having to cut employees and programs, to help with education and so on and so forth. But we have other pressing needs like infrastructure, to take one of the favorites, that not only create jobs now, but they also are investing in our economy as opposed to being consumption oriented, and therefore would have more lasting benefits in the long run. And I think what people like Larry Summers, who've been talking about this, and I and others feel, is that the package is probably too large for the need at the moment, given how much dry powder there is out there, given that a lot of the $900 billion that was just voted in December has not yet been spent, and even some of the money before that has not yet been spent. It just feels too large at this moment, and it does feel like it's a bit misdirected. The idea that people who have incomes up to $300,000 a year would get at least a partial stimulus check does not make any sense to me.
And it's billed as a COVID rescue plan, and yet a lot of the elements, like raising the minimum wage and aid to states and cities really have nothing to do with COVID.
Well, I've called this a legislative Trojan horse because they have tried to shoehorn in here programs that, as you say, are not directly related to COVID. The $15 minimum wage is certainly the best example of that. As you probably know, it seems very uncertain. I don't know which way it'll go, whether it will remain there. There's a question about whether it is allowed under the Senate rules to be passed in this particular manner. There are moderate Democrats like Joe Manchin from West Virginia who've raised strong objections to it. The president himself said over the weekend that he wasn't sure it was going to be part of this package. But it is an example.
Well, you have pundits, political pundits like Ezra Klein, who say what Biden must do first is help as many people as possible fast. Now, the question is, you call it a Trojan horse. I guess maybe you'll tell us what you mean by that. I thought a Trojan horse meant something that was very attractive, but then when you embrace it, it turns out to be something that's quite dangerous.
Well, that is, I guess, one way to think about it. I mean, to me, a Trojan horse is, well, you know, the real Trojan horse is that basically something is happening on a pretext that seems attractive, but inside of it, as you say, there's some things that are less attractive or that really don't resemble the thing that's on the outside of it, I guess is what I'm saying. And so they've created this thing that they call a COVID rescue package, or it's called the American Rescue Plan, I think is its official name. And so it sounds like it's rescuing people from COVID, but it's really trying to do some other stuff, solve other problems like the minimum wage problem, which are very legitimate problems, but it's not accurate to say they are really COVID rescue programs. That's all I'm trying to say.
One of the objectives appears to be to raise 11.7 million Americans out of poverty. Now, presumably they would have been in poverty whether there was COVID or not. So it really, there's a major element of the plan that's not COVID related. Yeah,
but let me be clear. I'm in favor of raising 11.7 million people out of poverty.
We all are, yeah.
I'm in favor of raising the minimum wage. We can discuss whether $15 is the right number or not. As you know, it's currently, I think, $7.25 on an inflation adjusted basis. And I think it was 1970, it was around $11 or $12. And so we have a big problem with the minimum wage and it needs to be dealt with. And it's important to get those 11.7 million people out of poverty. But it should, in my opinion, it should be done as a get people out of poverty package, not as a COVID rescue package.
Well, does it really matter if we're in crisis, whether you call it Tweedledee or Tweedledum, as long as you're getting money out to people who need it?
Well, it doesn't matter what you call it, but it matters how you do it. And raising the minimum wage is a good way to do it. It's probably not going to survive here because of the various parliamentary rules in the Senate, but I'm in favor of that. But sending checks to 95, just sending, checks out of nowhere to 95% of Americans is not to me the right policy either. They should be much more targeted. The relief should be much more targeted on the people who actually need it. And it also should be oriented toward more longer term solutions rather than kind of a short term Band-Aid kind of fix of giving people a check to help them over the next few months or whatever. That's not a long-term solution to anything.
Well, Republicans like Joni Ernst argue that raising the minimum wage, and in many states, $15 an hour is the median. So most people in those states would get a raise if you raise it to $15. But she argues that'd be devastating to small business. Do you agree that's the downside of raising the minimum wage? Of course, we haven't raised it. We haven't changed it for decades.
The yin and the yang is that minimum wages are important so that people can earn a decent amount of money and hopefully get above the poverty line, as we were just talking about. Even at $15, you're talking about what, $25,000 a year or something like that. That's barely a living wage in many parts of this country. But it is a fact that when you raise the minimum wage, some jobs get lost because employers essentially say, I'm going to substitute a machine for that job if the cost of that person is going to go up substantially. And I'm sure you saw the Congressional Budget Office came out the other day with its report and said, while it would help a large number of Americans, it would cost, I think it was 1.4 million jobs or something like that over a period of years. But that's a trade-off that I think has been studied pretty well by economists. And I think we all agree up to a point, and we can argue about whether $15 is the right point. Up to a point, it generally does overall help people at the bottom, even if some are going to lose their jobs. So the remainder will get a higher wage, and that's a good thing. The other problem that you've alluded to is the problem of different wage levels in different places in different states. And we'll have to see how this debate unfolds. We've never had any kind of a differential minimum wage around the country. We've never tried to tie it to local economic conditions, but it's an idea that at least we can talk about. I have yet to see any really full package put together how this would actually work if it were not a federal minimum wage across the board. But I would certainly be open to thinking about those kinds of approaches if someone came up with one.
Of course, the federal minimum wage is the minimum wage in most states in this country. Other states like California and New York have a minimum wage above the federal minimum wage. But you're absolutely right. There may be parliamentary obstacles to a minimum wage increase getting through the Senate.
Well, as I said, there's parliamentary obstacles, and there's also the fact that they could not get 50. I don't believe, from what people are saying, now you never know what they'll actually do. It doesn't sound like you could get 50 votes in the Senate today for a $15 minimum wage. It sounds like there are enough Democrats who would vote against that.
Now, what about the tax breaks? The history of tax breaks is that when you have a temporary tax break, it becomes a permanent tax break. So you have the child tax credit and the child care credit, incidentally, benefiting higher income individuals when it's the lower income individuals who may most need it. So the parents can go out and work while the children are being tended to. What's your take on those aspects of the
well, I'm actually quite excited about the direction that seems to be going in. It seems like there is a lot of focus on this by very senior senators and the White House. So you have Mitt Romney has come out with a plan in the last few days. Michael Bennet, who's one of the most thoughtful senators, has come out with a plan with Sherrod Brown in the last few days. The Biden administration has a proposal in its package, and they all work a little bit differently, but I think they're all designed and intended to help not just people who pay taxes, but even people who don't pay taxes but have children. It's really designed to help working families. It's designed to encourage people to have children. We need to grow our labor force in this country, and I think we'll see how the details get worked out. But I'm quite encouraged and excited that we're actually focusing on this problem and that there's some pretty thoughtful proposals out there by serious people.
And how do you feel about aid to states and cities? I mean, New York is certainly on its knees in terms of its finances. And if it doesn't get aid from the federal government, it has a big, big problem.
Yeah, I have to confess, I am a New Yorker. I'm here in New York at this very moment. I feel terrible about what's happening to my city and our state. And so I have a bias, and I have to confess I have a bias that it would be great to get some help from the federal government. Remember, one, that states have to and cities have to balance their budget by law. So we can't just go out and borrow money the way the federal government can. And historically, the federal government has provided aid to states and cities under extreme circumstances. Republicans would say, well, the blue states, they act fiscally irresponsibly, and so they shouldn't be getting money from the federal government. It's kind of their problem. But I would also remind everyone that states like New York send a lot more money to Washington than what they get back in other forms of government help and services. And it will come as no surprise that the state that has the most favorable ratio of how much money they send in taxes versus what they get back is Kentucky, where Mitch McConnell, until a couple of weeks ago, was the majority leader of the Senate and was able to direct money to his state. And if you went through many of the red states that are now getting up on their high horse and saying we should not be helping these irresponsible blue states, you'd find that they get far more money back from the federal government than what they send in taxes. And so I think it is fair to provide some money to the states that are hardest hit. It is also true, worth mentioning, that some states, California, I think notably, have actually had a surprising amount of revenue come in, partly because of the stock market and people selling stocks and paying a lot of capital gains taxes. So you want to calibrate the amount of aid to what is fair and needed and necessary. But I think there should be some aid.
Well, and also states can't go into bankruptcy, can they?
No, they can't go into bankruptcy. So, but we don't want them to, even if they could.
We don't want them to.
No, we don't want them to. Bankruptcy is never a good place for anybody to be.
That is true. Now, a lot has been said about bipartisanship. I mean, President Biden recently met with Republican leaders. They had a proposal. It really didn't settle anything, but they're continuing to talk and negotiate. How important is it, in your view, that there be bipartisan support for whatever the relief package is?
I think it would be wonderful. We have not had bipartisan support for any major, that's not fair. We did have bipartisan support last year for the COVID rescue packages. That is absolutely true. But in general, Washington has become more polarized. There's been less bipartisan support than there was in the past. It would be great to be able to go back to a world in which there was more bipartisan support, but it is not going to happen now. It is simply not going to happen now. There's no way the 10 moderate Republicans, forget even the conservative Republicans, the 10 moderate Republicans came up with a $600 billion package. The Biden administration, as you've said, and as we know, wants $1.9 trillion. There's no way they're going to compromise that out. This is clearly headed toward another package that is rammed through with 50 Democratic votes and the vice president casting the deciding vote in favor. As I said, that doesn't mean that the president is going to get everything he wants. He's still going to have to negotiate with the more conservative, less liberal, whatever you want to call them, senators like Joe Manchin from West Virginia, Kyrsten Sinema from Arizona, John Tester from Montana, folks like that, who are from red states or at best purple states in the case of Arizona. He's going to have to negotiate with them. And so I think you will see some changes to this package because of that.
But if it breaks down to a 50-50 vote with Vice President Harris casting the deciding vote, doesn't it play into the Republican narrative that we're headed toward socialism and that Biden is giving in to the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, the AOCs and the squad?
Well, the AOCs and the squad would want a package that's even bigger than this. So I don't think that's what's going on here. And I would also remind your viewers that when President Trump wanted to pass his tax cut bill, what we call the TCJA, in 2017, he did exactly the same thing, as did President Bush with legislation during President Bush 43 during his term. So it is not like the Democrats are playing a different game than everybody else. And as I just said, AOC and Bernie Sanders and whomever are not going to be the ones who decide what's in this package. It's going to be the most moderate Democrats, because you have to get that 50th senator on board. And there are not 50 AOCs in the Senate of the United States. There's like 5.
And we should be reminded that Trump wanted a package with $2,000 to each individual, which is exactly what's being proposed now, $1,300 on top of the $700 that.
$600 and $1,400. But that's part of the political problem that Biden has. That Trump put this thing out there, a bunch of Republicans jumped on it, and now the Democrats feel that if they walk back from it, they will be looking like they're kind of cheap compared to what the Republicans were prepared to do, even though Trump did not have full support and it was never passed, of course. The most they would pass was $600. But nonetheless, it is out there as part of the narrative.
So feeling better, I have a question for you, Steve Rattner. I feel reassured just listening to you. And the question is, should Congress enact the $1.9 trillion package, the Republican Romney package, or something in between?
Something in between. In a perfect world, this is not what's going to happen. I think they are going to enact, if not 1.9 trillion, very close to it. But if I were God, I would make this package smaller. I would reduce those stimulus checks, which at the moment cost $450 billion, to something much smaller and targeted to the people who really need it. I would go through the numbers they have for state and local and education, which are very big numbers. They're talking about more for education than the entire budget of the education department. I would go through all that and make sure this money is being spent wisely. And as I said, I would add things that have a more long-term positive impact, like infrastructure. But I think we need a big package. I think we need to do big, bold things again in this country. It just needs to be done better. You know, the president has a saying, "Build back better," and I agree with that. And part of better is getting government spending to be better.
Well, we'll hope he builds back better. Thank you so much for coming by. This has been just wonderful. And thank you for coming by. Tune in next week for more conversations. I'm Jim Zirin. Be well, be safe, and all the best.